Hello, this is Archie Dunlop with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, June the 20th, 2023. I want to start with a thank you and an apology. Thank you for subscribing to me, if you have subscribed to me, because I've now hit 500 subscribers. Now, I know that doesn't sound very much, but to me, that's really important. You know, with the internet, it is so difficult to be heard. You know, I was writing a blog on and off for years, and, I don't think anyone hardly ever read what I wrote. And, I suppose it's like, in space, no one can hear you scream. You're just there being ignored, and, what is the point? Anyway, getting 500 subscribers, even though it's not a huge amount in the infinity of things, by YouTube standards, it's a very small amount, but it is 500 people, and it makes me feel alive, and of course it encourages me to carry on with what I'm doing. So if you have subscribed, thank you very much. If you haven't subscribed, thank you for visiting my channel and listening to me. As far as the apology is concerned, I do apologize for my presentation. I know the videos aren't of great quality. I'm just still using a webcam, and my own presentation leaves a lot to be desired. So what I can say is now I've hit 500 subscribers, I will be making a greater effort to improve the presentation of this channel. Now, what I want to talk about today is the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. Jupiter and Saturn in astrology are sometimes known as the great chronocrators. A chronocrator is a ruler of time. Jupiter and Saturn as a pair mark time. Jupiter is a planet of expansion. It's how we move forward. It doesn't know any limits. Saturn is a planet of restriction. It knows that there has to be, there absolutely has to be limits. So together, these two planets represent the beat of the historical, social, economic cycle. Jupiter is about economic growth, for example. Saturn is about contraction. With the COVID crisis a few years ago, the Federal Reserve tried to encourage the economy by putting interest rates down to pretty much zero. And that was a very Jupiter thing to do, trying to encourage expansion. But then the Federal Reserve got too much expansion and there was inflation. So the Federal Reserve had to do the Saturn bit and increase interest rates in the hope that would put some cold water on the economy. And would stop the overheating. So you've got this constant dance between Jupiter and Saturn, expansion, restriction, and that's how it goes. And so, today I do want to look at that cycle, particularly because yesterday, which was Monday, June the 19th, 2023, so June the 19th, there was a sextile aspect between Jupiter and Saturn. Now, sextiles in astrology are generally considered to be fortunate. They're about talent and positive engagement. And the sextile aspect should be seen in the light of this Jupiter-Saturn cycle, because the cycle we're in began on December the 21st, 2020, when there was a conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn in the first degree of Aquarius. And from then on, Jupiter and Saturn started to move apart. This is because Jupiter moves faster from Saturn, and this whole cycle, the Jupiter-Saturn cycle from conjunction to conjunction, is 20 years. And so they got further apart, and the angle between these two planets started to increase. And then yesterday, Tuesday, June the 20th, that angle was exactly 60 degrees, the sextile. And so what I want to do is consider how this sextile between Jupiter and Saturn, which is kind of happening right now. I know it technically happened yesterday, but it's kind of around today, so it's not like you've missed anything. So, what does it actually mean? So I want to just have a quick look at this sextile from a historical point of view. So using my astrology program, I think my Kepler 8.0, I have the ability to print out every Jupiter-Saturn sextile, over whatever period I care to choose. So let's just look at this historically. I'll just choose a couple of dates just to give you a flavour of what I'm thinking. So you probably can't see this, but it's just basically a list. I asked for basically all the Jupiter-Saturn sextiles between 1800 and 2050. So that's a chunk of time, 250 years of Jupiter-Saturn of sextiles. Now there are two sextiles. There's the first sex, have the conjunction, and then a few years later there is a sextile. Then there's another sextile towards the end of the cycle, just before Jupiter and Saturn make another conjunction. But I'm interested in the first sextile, the sextile that happens a few years after the conjunction. So let me show you what I mean. So let's say around 1940, I think 1940, around then, there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 1940. Just as the Second World War was getting underway, and the sextile happened. You can see, I don't know, it's difficult to see, but there were three. It started in around 1943. So November the 13th, 1943, there was a Jupiter-Saturn sextile. March the 1st, 1944, there was a Jupiter-Saturn sextile. September the 4th, 1944, there was a Jupiter-Saturn sextile. So this sextile, in terms of the Second World War, represented the point when Germany started really, really seriously losing. By the time of the last passing on September the 4th, you'd had the D-Day landings. You'd had Operation Bagration, where the Soviets had stormed through into pretty much kicked the Germans out of most of Western Russia, and were storming into Eastern Europe. And so that was it. So that was the sextile, represented real optimism. This was a new cycle. This was the way the world was going to be. So that's one period of history. Or you might say, look at the 60s. Now, there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction around 1960, 1961, around then. I haven't got the precise dates to hand. So you had the conjunction. New cycle started in 1960, and of course in the West, certainly you think of the 60s in terms of liberation, freedom, the swinging 60s, all of that kind of stuff. Of course, the decade of the 1960s did start with Eisenhower as president, a Republican, perhaps associated with the old order. So the 60s perhaps didn't really get underway and show themselves to the full until the sextile. And so the sextile, we can see that the Jupiter and Saturn were sextile in 1963 and early 1964. And so this was a point where the 60s really began, and very often the sextile is the beginning of the golden part of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. Move forward 20 years. There was a Jupiter-Saturn sextile in the 80s. In the 80s, particularly mid 80s, was not particularly my kind of world, but if you were a certain kind of person, it would have been. 1984 and through late 1984, May the 5th, 1984, June the 8th, 1984, January the 22nd, 1985. So what was happening in 1984? Well, that was kind of Ronald Reagan's re-election. This was the triumph of the Reagan view of the world. He won a complete landslide in 1984, at the end of 1984. That world, that vision that Reagan stood for, and came into being. So if you were a Republican, this would have been great. This was the sextile. Looking 10 years, 20 years later, there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the year 2000. Now, you might want to associate the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, from 2000 to 2020, as perhaps having a connection with, perhaps the growth of the European Union. And we find that there was a Jupiter-Saturn sextile on May the 1st, 2004. Now, May the 1st, 2004 was the exact date that Poland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, and I think Slovenia, I think a couple of other places, but Hungary, joined the European Union. So, if you were a Slovak, for example, May the 1st, 2004 must have been a great day. You were finally part of the European dream. And that's for Jupiter-Saturn sextile. This would have been great. It's the high point of the cycle. It's where the good times are still to come. And so that's how we might see the sextile. And so then we have the sextile yesterday. Today you can still see it. Here is the positions of the planets for today, Tuesday, June the 20th, 2023. There's Jupiter, 724 Taurus. There's Saturn, 712 Pisces. So the conjunction was here at 0 degrees Aquarius on December the 21st, 2020. And so Jupiter moves faster from Saturn. So now we've reached a stage where they're at sextile. So what's it going to be about? It may not be what we expect. Now, it could be that from an economic point of view, that some of the problems that we've been facing may ease. Very often the Jupiter-Saturn sextile, the applying sextile, is good news economically. So that's one possibility. Another possibility, thinking about 1944, and that was 1943, 1944. That was about like the war, definitely the Second World War, definitely moving in one direction. And this was not, the Second World War was obviously not a trivial war. I mean, this was going to affect the destiny of Europe and the world for half a century and more. So we may be facing a similar situation, bearing in mind there is a war in Ukraine. What is that Jupiter-Saturn sextile going to mean? We may not be able to see it right now. But maybe the war is now approaching a decisive phase. And now I'm not going to speculate. I mean, you can work it out for yourself, but I'm not going to say anything further on the subject. But that is a possibility. You know, when we look back at this sextile, maybe in 10, 20 years' time, I think it'll be quite clear what this sextile was all about. I think it'll be quite clear about the indications about, you know, which side was winning and how this was going to shape the world. And I should say also that, you know, this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in December the 21st, 2020 does relate to this sextile. Now, when I wrote about this Jupiter-Saturn sextile, Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on December the 21st, 2020, on my blog, which I don't think anyone reads, but what I said was that I believed that this next 20 years was going to be all about Russia, and perhaps the triumph of Russia. Sorry if you didn't want to hear that, but that's my view. I believe that Aquarius has a strong connection with Russia. I suppose part of that is the sort of Ptolemaic view of geography, which would connect Aquarius with Russia. But I think that's how I see it, and I suppose my feeling is that when we look back on it, we would perhaps see the events of now as being the sign that Russia is starting to get the better of Ukraine. That's my view on this sextile. I take it or leave it. Anyway, as far as what's going on today, the moon is void, of course. It's made its last aspect before leaving Cancer. Its last major aspect to a traditional planet, but it is making a trine to Neptune. That trine between the moon and Neptune, it's all about fantasy. It's about strong feelings, strong sensitivities, perhaps about psychic abilities, but it's also about deluding ourselves. You know, it's very easy to pick up information, and we're surrounded by information. But just because we pick up information doesn't mean that we can do anything useful with it. You know, we can pick up someone's feelings but completely misunderstand them. So we do have to be very careful about that. So if you have a strong feeling about something, consider the possibility that it's not real. So there is a warning there. Also, Jupiter. There's Jupiter. Jupiter is on the where's Jupiter? Where's Mars? Where's Neptune? Jupiter is on the Mercury-Neptune midpoint. So there's Mercury, there's Neptune, and Jupiter is hitting the Mercury-Neptune midpoint. Mercury-Neptune is about perhaps mental confusion. It may be about being oversensitive. Jupiter is about expansion. So there's a danger there that we might get the wrong impression about something, pick up the wrong signal, and then, because of that Jupiter, go over the top with it. We might take massive action based on a false premise. So be very careful about that. On a positive note, perhaps a positive note, there is a Venus-Mars conjunction, and it's at the midpoint of Venus-Mars is at around 15 Leo, which is sesquiquadrate the Aries point. So we have Aries on the Venus-Mars midpoint. And the Venus-Mars is about sexuality. It's about how sex is presented. Aries is the world at large. And so perhaps today, in terms of, what people are talking about, maybe there'll be a certain sense in which people are overly concerned about sex. But in a general collective way. I don't necessarily mean that in a very personal sense. So that is certainly something to consider. Now, as far as my forecast for the 12 signs are concerned, I have, as usual, gone through the 12 signs for June the 20th, and it's a Tuesday. So here we go. Aries, you're sensitive to what is going on around you, and you can tune into people's thoughts and feelings. Taurus, you look at the world and you can balance the positives and the negatives. Your realism is appreciated. Gemini, you seem confused, but actually your brain is working away behind the scenes. Your feelings about money can probably be trusted. Cancer, you're like a radio receiver with information converging on your psychic senses. Your vision is powerful. That is because Moon is ruler of Cancer and it is making a trine to Neptune. Leo, it's almost your turn, but not quite. So wait quietly and take notes on how other people are handling the situation. Virgo, from your subjective perspective, things may seem remarkably bad, but remember, it's society that's rotten, not you. Libra, go through the motions without showing your true self. That way, you'll stay out of trouble and even prosper. Scorpio, your feelings are powerful and you can your feelings are powerful and you can see the next move, but it's not a time for showing off. Sagittarius, it's easy to get the wrong idea, and when you make that first mistake, there's a danger that you'll make another mistake. Self-criticism is important. Capricorn, what is wrong with everyone? They all seem to be on a cloud. One person's carelessness is another person's opportunity. Aquarius, there is material preparation and there is also spiritual preparation, and the spiritual side of things will soon want your attention. Pisces, yes, you are creative in a manner of speaking, but it's a situation that could lead into dangerous waters. So that's the astrology out of the way, and I'm now going to move on to the I Ching. As usual, I threw the coins up in the air and I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? And that includes me. So we are getting an I Ching reading. I am not detached from it. So the first hexagram I threw was before completion. This means that we're in a situation where we haven't quite finished. There are still challenges that need to be dealt with. The I Ching talks about a fox crossing ice. It has to cross the ice without getting its tail wet. So yeah, it's potentially dangerous. So when we contemplate the completion of whatever we're trying to complete, we do need to be aware that right now we probably haven't got what it takes. It's just going to be too difficult. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we can't do it. It's just we're going to need some help. And in fact, there's a lot of stuff out there that is just going to hold us up. And it's not just stuff out there, it's stuff within ourselves that is going to hold us up. We've got to be very vigorous in how we deal with the problem if we want to complete the task, and I think we do. So what is it? What is that thing you're trying to complete, but you haven't got there yet? It could be anything. It's going to be different for each one of us. So think, what is that thing? What needs to be completed? And what is that situation where you simply haven't got the strength or the ability right now to see it through? And ask yourself, how you can get people to help you out, because it can be completed. Now, the next hexagram on the surface doesn't seem great. This hexagram is hexagram number 18, which is decay. In other words, we're dealing with something which is in a poor state of repair because it's been not just neglected, but there is decay. Actually, we can see this decay if we kind of follow the symbolism of the hexagram. In the I Ching, it divides hexagrams into 2 trigrams. This trigram is represents Earth, like you see a sort of mountain-like thing, and this bottom trigram is about air. So it's kind of like the earthy part of air, if that makes any sense. So, and that's how mold spreads, isn't it? It's like little bits of stuff go through the air and they settle and then they spread. And so we've got to look at that stuff that we're trying to sort out, and it's just full. It's decaying. It's been neglected. It's moldy. It needs to be sorted out. It may not be our fault. It may be someone else's fault, but that doesn't mean to say that we can't sort it out. We need to deal with it. It's going to be tough, but if we are prepared to deal with it, and I know that we don't like dealing with moldy food, all that kind of stuff, if we're prepared to deal with it, then I think we can sort it out, and in the end we can complete the task in front of us. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for today, and I will talk to you tomorrow.